My name is Leonard Shay, and this is the Leo Shay Show. We've got a great guest lined up today. A few months ago, I was looking through an old dictionary to amuse myself and came across the word logomachy, or logomachy, and which is a fight over words. My first thought was of the many definitions of capitalism. Those that are for it and those that are against it never seem to be speaking about the same thing. My guest today has been around the world as an advocate of free markets and capitalism. I know him best from the Foundation for Economic Education. His name is Lawrence Reed, and welcome, Lawrence, and I appreciate you sitting for this interview.
Hey, thank you, Leonard. It's a pleasure to be on your program, and thanks for having me.
Yes. So let me just, right off the bat, with the way people define capitalism, your opponents see capitalism as mean, vicious, cruel even. You could even say evil. That's not really how you view capitalism, I see. Tell me a little bit about what capitalism is and how you view it.
Okay. Well, capitalism, even though that's a term that was cooked up by Karl Marx, an opponent of it, that is unfortunately what we've come to use to describe what I'm about to tell you. I see it more as a system of freedom and free markets, but if I had to give you a definition, capitalism is an economic arrangement or a system in which people own property privately. They exchange goods in a free marketplace by prices that are mutually agreed to. You do have a government in such a system, typically, but it is a government devoted to the creation of a safe and environment in which crime is minimal and people are allowed to go about their business in peace. So it means for an individual, it means many options. You can go to work for someone else. You can go to work for yourself. You can start a business. You can invest. You can save. And you can create, innovate, and prove in the marketplace of exchange to others that your services or your goods are worth their patronage.
Okay. One of the reasons I'm doing this podcast is because as we go to the polls and such, my vote and somebody else's vote, and whether they be an academic or a politician or anybody, they're all counted the same. And this podcast is generally for a layman, a blue-collar worker. My background is that. And give me a little bit of a vision of, let's say, capitalism takes over the world, and maybe that's not the way to say it, but there's a great increase in growth in capitalism. Socialism ebbs and is no longer around. What do you see changed in America and the world in general if we have a great increase in capitalism?
Well, you're right. At one point you said perhaps that wasn't the way to characterize it, because sometimes if you think of it as an it, capitalism, as if it's some living, breathing, touchable entity, then people can easily think of it as a kind of beast running around pushing people this way or that. But it's really, it's not that at all. In fact, it is the absence of a central plan. It's the absence of a handful of elites from the top issuing orders that they back up with the force of government. Capitalism is really what happens when you leave people alone and you simply provide for a safe environment in which their property, their lives, their contracts, their choices are free and safe. And then when that happens, then people go to town. They start producing. They create businesses. If that way of thinking were widely enough accepted, and it really was the rule rather than the exception, then you would find explosions in productivity and exchange and invention. And we have endless examples throughout history where that was the case. And one of the favorites of mine is post-World War II Germany, which had just gone through 12 years of socialist rule by Hitler's Nazis, then was defeated, demoralized, devastated, occupied, divided. And, it was in a terrible situation economically. It had hyperinflation. I mean, one of the most terrible moments in the history of that country or any country. But what happened? Within 10 years, we start talking about, by 1960, the German economic miracle. And it was really nothing more than capitalism. It was the government in the late 40s said, okay, we've had enough of that socialism stuff. We're going to free markets. We're going to cut taxes. We're going to spur entrepreneurship and institute a sound currency. And within 10 years, Germany had gone from complete devastation to the richest power in Western Europe. It was capitalism that did that, and there are no examples in history where capitalism screwed things up, impoverished people, and then socialism came along and saved the day. None. But there are lots of examples like I just gave of Germany.
Part of what I've seen, at least in the media and such, is it seems like you guys have a harder selling job. Because one video I watched recently talked about, it was an interview with a chef, and when all this pandemic hit and such, and people left work, went home on unemployment and such, and then things started to shift, and he's trying to call his people back, and a lot of them were just like, well, I'm gonna stay home. I can get say $900 a week. You may pay me more than that, but I don't have to do anything. In your vision, it's still, we've got to go to work. There's nothing. It's not necessarily, you still got to plant the field, so to speak. You still got to harvest.
You've just described, Leonard, a situation, a mess created by government and its handling of the COVID-19 crisis. There's no question that government can take even the best of situations and turn it into the worst in no time at all, and that's something we always have to be on guard with. But the fact that we have a difficult time making the case for freedom and free markets or capitalism, that's a fact. There's no question about it. But that's in part because people don't understand fully what the other side is actually offering. They hear progressives and socialists, people of the left, saying, we're going to give you stuff. It won't cost anything. We'll provide you security. And by the way, we're going to do it at the expense of those evil rich that we have spent a lot of time vilifying. Well, that sounds appealing to people who don't think very deeply. But I want to live in a society where people are rewarded for their enterprise, their risk-taking, their innovation, their creativity, their adding to the wealth of society as measured by consumers, not by government bureaucrats.
What are some of the hurdles, I guess, that need to be moved or looked over to establish a greater capitalist society?
Oh, I think this is essentially a battle of ideas, and so the hurdles that we have to overcome are errors in thinking, and those errors take many forms. One is an excessive focus on the short term. There are a lot of people who don't think much further than the next paycheck or the next promise of a politician. They don't think of the long run effects of things. So they believe if they get something from the government today, even if it is because the government goes more deeply in debt, they're not thinking about the next generation that has to pay it off. They're thinking only of the here and now and themselves as opposed to all people and the long run. So that's a major hurdle right there, just getting them to think in a long-term fashion. Another hurdle is the issue of character. I think personal character is so important that it's the most important issue in the world because everything else flows from it. And if people have lousy character, what that means is they're dishonest, or they're irresponsible, or they're impatient, or they don't respect the lives and the property and the rights of other people. They're thinking only of themselves and the here and now. Those are character defects. And a society that allows its character to deteriorate, I don't think is a society that's going to keep whatever liberties it has.
Wow. I'm kind of like wanting to go different directions, but I'm also wanting this to be just a introduction into capitalist ideas. Give me, let's say, 30 or 50 years from now, if, say, academia and the media and such were giving a more favorable view of capitalism for the next couple of decades, what do you think? I mean, what do you think the world will look like in 30 years or 50 years?
Well, I think if capitalism got a fair shake in the media, which it doesn't every day, that you would see a freer world, a more prosperous world. You'd see more businesses being started up. You'd see more productivity and invention, innovation taking place. Those are the things that happen when people are left alone and when they're not constantly harassed or vilified, when their property is not taken, and instead when they're left free to be traders in the marketplace with willing customers. So I just think that more freedom and free markets, or capitalism, makes for a more peaceful, productive, and prosperous world.
As one of the necessities you list is sort of character to do this. It seems that the schools have maybe taken over the molding of character of young citizens nowadays. Where do you think that should come from?
Well, I think the molding of character begins at a very early age, certainly around 2 at the latest.
Yeah.
Parents have a good opportunity, even at that early age, to begin teaching important values to their children. And so by the time they even go to school, whether it's public or private or homeschool, they should have a significant portion of their ultimate character formed or on its way. And if that's not the case, then it becomes ever harder to change a person later. So the earlier you can impart values like long-term thinking and respect for others and perseverance and patience and so forth, those kinds of traits, the earlier you can impart them to young people, the better. The problem is that parents, I think, are falling down these days in doing a lot of that. They've abdicated much of their responsibility and just turned it over to the schools. And government schools have never, in all the history of mankind, been good at teaching character, let alone teaching liberty. So you end up teaching a lot of young people to think of the state or government as a fountain of free goodies, and just it creates all kinds of problems. So I'm very unhappy with what government has done with education.
And if I can, one of the things that I've wanted to do with some of these ideas like capitalism and other ideas is investigate a little bit and make it kind of a personal face to it. How did you come to these ideas? Were you always capitalist in view or free market oriented?
Well, I was never a socialist. My father was a small businessman, a hardware store owner in a small town, and he imparted some very good values that I think have stuck with me to this day. But I really became ideologically committed, passionately committed to freedom and free markets, or capitalism, as I looked around the world as a teenager and saw what the communist world was doing to its people. So I became involved in the freedom movement, you might say, from an anti-communist angle. I saw the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968. I saw the suppression of dissidents in one communist or socialist country after another. And I thought, oh my gosh, I mean, who would want to live like that? We need to make sure Americans appreciate the freedoms they have and the importance of maintaining them, and not ever trying to imitate what's going on in those other countries. So, and the more I learned, the more I gravitated to a kind of libertarian way of thinking, which is a respect for the rights of peaceful people who leave each other alone and live in harmony.
Who were some of the lights that you looked to when you said your teenage years you were turning that way?
Yes. I had a very good economist as a professor at Grove City College during my undergraduate years. I chose that college, in fact, largely because of him. His name was Dr. Hans Sennholz. He was from Germany. He had seen Hitler's socialism up close and didn't want any part of it. And so he spoke very passionately in the classroom about freedom and free markets and the importance of avoiding the concentration of power, such as you saw in Nazi Germany or in communist countries. That had great impact on me, learning from him. He was a very eloquent person. And in terms of the things I read, the economist Henry Hazlitt, whom in later years I came to know, he was the author of Economics in One Lesson.
Yes.
That's a classic that people can read for free on the Foundation for Economic Education website, fee.org. And he was just an amazing thinker. And he impressed upon me the importance of looking at the long term and all people, not just the short run and a few people, because the two are very different things.
Well, let me wrap up then, and I appreciate your time. This has been enjoyable, and I appreciate you just giving your time to non-academic audience here.
Oh, my pleasure, Leonard. I appreciate your having me.
And thank you very much.
Okay.
Good day.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. My guest today has been Lawrence Reed of the Foundation for Economic Education. We really appreciate his time. And if you want to support this podcast, we're registered with Buy Me a Coffee. The link will be in the description. Our first goal is to hire somebody to create some decent bumper music.